to skill and burst, or burst and skill? This question, though seemingly innocuous, befuddles the psyche of many who have attempted team building to try to manage energy, be it to buff or set up a reaction, or to give particles to a character. One misstep in our rotations is enough for our characters to skill to burst. No more. Hi there! In my Nahida video, I got a lot of comments thanking me for putting rotations on screen. While I am extremely grateful for the positivity, I panicked. Truth be told, there's a lot more nuance to rotations than you can get from following a flowchart. While in most cases, you can't go wrong following them, if you don't understand what is rotation, you may make some mistakes that actually ruin the effectiveness of the rotation. I'm Souldapop, and in this video, I hope to give some tips you can use in team building to dial in on the rotations for your teams, and understand why certain rotations are set up the way they are. First tip, and I know this seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many players never do this. Read your talents, constellations, artifacts, and weapons. Sometimes the answer is right there in the description, like with Wonder, where his burst says, "Wind favored state will end after casting." If after reading that, you decided you probably shouldn't burst immediately after using his skill, you get a gold star. Good job. But oftentimes, it's a little more nuanced than that. Say you're using Shimenawas on him. You have to pay 15 energy to trigger the effect. So that tells you probably shouldn't burst before using his skill either, because if you do, you won't have 15 energy to trigger Shimenawas. Does using one ability buff another ability? Well, it might be a good idea to do the one that buffs the other ability before doing the other ability. Does the ability last for a limited amount of time and the other ability isn't benefited by it? Well, you don't want to waste the time you have with that ability doing something that isn't benefited by it. Does using the skill before the burst buff that character instead of the one you want it to? Then you should probably do it after the burst. Does using one refresh the other? For the love of God, don't use both. Use one in the first rotation and the other in the second. Does a certain buff only last 10 seconds and you spend 8 seconds setting everyone else up before taking field with the character that takes up a significant amount of field time? Stop that. You've been following too many one-shot cops from the early days of the game, and the character that really needs buffing won't have the buff long enough. Move that character later in the rotation so the character that really needs the buff has it for the duration of their field time. Hopefully, you don't need to know anything about theory crafting to be befuddled by how rotations like this became so popular early on. Just read your things and you'll do fine. But that's all surface level stuff. Let's get into the real nitty-gritty. Energy generation. Elemental skills are the primary way characters generate energy for their burst in Genshin. Oftentimes, whether to skill or burst then skill, will come down to where you want the particles from those skills to go. Do the particles need to go primarily to the character casting the skill? In that case, more often than not, you will want to skill then burst. The character will catch the particles while in their burst animation, which makes your rotations a lot smoother and quicker than staying on the character to catch them when you burst and skill. However, if there's another character in your team you want those particles to go to, you'll typically want to burst then skill so you can swap to that character and catch the particles. The major exception to this is if the character gets 2 casts of their skills, in which case you'll want to use their skill and burst to catch the first set of particles, skill again, and then swap to the character of the same element to catch the second set. If the character is the only character of that element and there isn't something unique about their kit to encourage you to do otherwise, skill burst skill will still be the way to go. Using both skills first will cause your first wave of particles to be wasted if your energy is already capped. and using both skills afterward will increase their field time dramatically. Similarly, if you're funneling particles to another character and they are capped on energy, you'll want to burst immediately after swapping to them so the energy from those particles isn't wasted. Sometimes, no matter how fine-tuned your rotations are, this will happen because enemy particles vary a lot from fight to fight, but we'll have to get to that in another video. Just remember, it's important to know when you need to make adjustments to your rotation depending on how much energy they generate fighting particular enemies. Luckily, most exceptions to the rule will typically want to remain on field anyway. Now, I recognize that's a lot of information, and you might be wondering why when you use your skill makes such a big difference for energy generation. That's a really good train of thought to be on, because understanding why will put you on the right track to being able to nail rotations on your own. You see, not all particles affect characters equally. The first and most obvious way particles impact the character's energy is through their energy recharge. At a baseline, characters have 100% energy recharge. This means a particle that would be worth 1 energy to your character, if at 100% energy recharge and on field, will be converted to 1 energy for that character. If the character has 200%, it will be converted to 2 energy. An easy way to think about this is to put a decimal here. 100% becomes 1.00. 200% is 2.00. So, if your character had 155% energy recharge, how much energy do you think they would get from that particle? If you said 1.55 energy, you're getting it. Good stuff. That's all fine and dandy, but what does it have to do with when you should use your skill? A lot, actually. You see, it's not as simple as every particle equals 1 energy. The value of the particle changes depending on the element of the particle, whether the character that catches the particle is on field or not, and even the number of characters in your party. But we'll ignore that for now. Until Genshin starts releasing characters that want you to play less than 4 characters in a team, it's not something worth worrying our pretty little heads over. If the character is on field, the value is only affected by the element of the particle. If the particle is the same element, the energy generation is 3 times as effective. So if we take our on-field character with 200% energy recharge, how much energy will a single particle of the same element give them? Well, if we do what we did earlier and convert the percent to a whole number, 2 times 3 equals 6. That one elemental particle generated 6 energy for them, whereas a particle of a different element, like in our first example, would only generate 2. If that character has a 60 cost burst, that would mean the character can get their burst back while on field catching particles of the same element with 10 particles, whereas particles of a different element would require 30 particles. So as you can see, energy generation is far more effective when catching particles of the same element while on field. But what about off field? Good question. This is where things get really interesting. You see, in a team of 4 characters, that particle also generates energy for everyone else, but less effectively. 0.6 times effectively. So assume you have a character of a different element. Even if that character has 200% energy recharge, they'll only get 1.2 energy from that particle, meaning it would take 50 particles for them to get their burst back while only generating energy from particles of different elements while off field if they also had a 60 cost burst. But what if they're the same element? In that case, it's still 3 times effective, but also 0.6 times effective. More effective plus less effective seems a little weird, but it's all just standard multiplication. So we can change the order around however we want and still arrive at the same answer. In this case, a character with 200% energy recharge would generate 3.6 energy. See? 3 times more effective than the character of a different element catching it while off field. If you haven't started to piece things together, let me ask a question that might set things straight for you. Do all characters have the same cost burst? If we follow step 1, we can see no, they don't. Some characters have lower cost burst, and some have very high cost burst. So when we're deciding when to use our skills, who would be the best character to catch the particles? Is it the character currently on field with the lower cost burst and more energy recharge that can reach their burst cost effectively without catching particles? Or the character with the higher cost burst that can't have as much ER because they have to balance it with their damaging stats and needs to get the most out of every particle that comes their way? Unfortunately, while these are good rules to follow, in general, sometimes there are exceptions to the rule that the game doesn't tell you. For instance, not all characters generate the same amount of particles with their skills, and there's nothing in their talents that tells you. So, in some cases, like with Xingqiu and Yelan, despite the fact that Xingqiu has the higher cost burst, since he generates more particles than Yelan, especially with Sack Sword, it's more effective to battery Yelan with Xingqiu. But the principle remains the same. The unit that needs the extra energy needs to be catching particles while on field. Now, that you know this, try paying attention to the number of particles your characters generate with their skills. It'll go a long way in helping you decide where to place them in your rotations. But if you don't have the patience for that, other players have already done the work, and there are a lot of resources available for how many particles characters generate with their skills. And I hope that helps everyone have a bit of a better understanding about why when you use your skill in your rotation is so important, and that it can serve you well when you're team building or trying to figure out any problems you might be having with your rotations. Now, before I go, I've got some homework for you. One thing I didn't mention is that there's another type of particle your characters can generate. Clear particles that are generated from things like Favonius weapons. Your homework is this. If clear particles give 2 times the energy of a particle that isn't the same as the character's element, how much total energy will Favonius Sword's 6 clear particles give your team if the on-field character has 200% energy recharge and the rest of your team has 100% energy recharge? We got awfully close to talking about Sack Sword versus Fav on Xingqiu here. Think I should go there? Maybe after watching the video, you can figure it out for yourselves in the comments. Good luck. Later.